Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Big Apple Film Festival mentoring and networking session. We have today with us Eric Sinha. He is a storyboard artist, and we're going to be talking storyboarding. And it's a Q&A, so hope you have a lot of questions for him. And you can do that by using a raised hand emoji, or just you can either type a question in the chat box and I could ask it for you. So let's get started. I'll have Eric introduce himself, give you a little background, and we can get into the questions. Thanks.
Sure, nice to meet you all. My name is Eric Sinha. I'm an animation professor and I also teach storyboarding. And when I'm not teaching, I'm also a filmmaker, mostly independent, but I work out of a little studio. And I also teach kids 9 to 17 how to storyboard and animate as well. My background is mostly in commercial and filmmaking, and only until recently did I really get into documentary filmmaking. But through all of those things, we've always been using storyboards to help pace time, show visually what's going on. So I think that it's been the one skill that I've had that no matter what project I'm working on, I've always found myself storyboarding pretty much everything. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Great. So I guess, can you give us the basics of what's the function of a storyboard?
Yeah, so whenever I get into the storyboarding process, it actually happens even when writing. I'll have my script right here. If I'm working on a film or a documentary, even once you have that script settled and it's formulating, then really at that point you're just kind of doing little thumbnails or doodles to kind of visually give you some idea of what the cinematic element is going to look like. But once you actually get into the storyboarding process, then you're really diving down into each panel, the pacing, the timing, the lighting, the acting. It literally is covering everything within that. Like, you're basically already shooting the film in your head, is how I like to think about it.
So even when you're writing, you actually start doing little sketches to help you kind of imagine what your scene's going to look like on the screen.
Yeah, I've always been such a visual person. It's hard for me to read or hear or absorb something without visually trying to see what that looks like. So naturally, that's probably why I entered into storyboarding without even thinking about it as a career, as like a young adult. But I think it's played into, sorry, let me turn off that notification real quick. It's really played into that strong suit of mine of just visualizing everything and making sure that whatever the script is saying has that visual element playing out, so we can, once you get on set, you want to know how many background actors am I going to need, what's the angle I'm filming this in, what kind of lighting elements am I going to have to bring in for this scene. So it's not only something to visually help you as a tool, but also as a producer or working on set, you can prepare a little bit better as well.
Okay, so how early do you come into the process? So like if we're shooting a film and we have a script and we're kind of in pre-production, at what point would it be a good idea to hire a storyboarder to come in and...
Yeah, I think anyone can storyboard. It's something you have to practice. But if you're going to hire it out or whatever the case, I think typically from my perspective, I work a lot with the director and the writer and me. The storyboard artist can also be what's considered a story artist, where you're actually helping develop the script. Because if things aren't playing out visually, then you kind of readjust the script to block things out differently. So I'd say as soon as you have like a first pass or a first draft or even some ideas of how the script is going to go, getting that visual element tied in is extremely important. And for those that have never storyboarded for their project before, I think once you get into it, you start to practice drawing out the visuals and you'll immediately see the benefits.
I would imagine it would speed time up on set, like knowing, I mean, I guess you would involve your DP as well with the process. And so before you're even going into a scene, everybody kind of knows how it's going to play out.
Exactly. You know what lenses you're going to use because you've already storyboarded. I'm cutting from this wide shot to this close up, and I need an 85 millimeter. You know, all of these things can be detailed out through the storyboarding process.
And you do that, so when you just look at a script that somebody gets to you, you could start to visualize what shots just from the writing, is that, I mean, it's fascinating to me because I think I mentioned to you before, I've produced 3 films and we've never used a storyboard.
Hmm.
And you know, I definitely know we could have used one because a lot of a lot of the scenes you're like trying to make stuff up on the fly without having, proper preparation. Um, so you can just kind of look at a script and understand what shots are what how like how many panels would set up a scene, like, do you need for a scene?
You know, visually, I think filmmaking has, it's not like a pattern or anything, but it depends on each scene. And, you know, usually starting with kind of a wide shot to establish what's going on, and then you're pushing in closer. And once you get into dialogue, then you're paneling out, you know, over the shoulder, whatever these cases are. So it's like, it depends on how long the scene is. But I think the last thing you want is to get on set and say, okay, so how are we going to shoot this, or what's the plan of action for capturing these moments, when long ago all of these elements should have already been kind of thought of through storyboarding, which is one thing that always resonates with me. Is I don't test my math, but people say about $1 spent in storyboarding or pre-production is worth 10 once you're on set and actually in production. So if you think of it that way, anytime you spend ahead of time is, you know, you're saving a ton of money.
Sure. And then for an action sequence, you would kind of choreograph it. I mean, so we've used stunt coordinators, so I don't know if they would also be involved in the storyboarding process, where you're kind of choreographing a fight scene.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, how many, how many different panels do you need? I mean, I guess each thing's different, but
Yeah, you know, it's the best way that I can say it is, um, it's important to have like a table read or to read through whatever the script is, especially for dialogue, so that you can take that audio and then start to create what's called an animatic. So you not only do you storyboard, but then it's really, really important to get an audible cue for everything. So you build out the soundscape, and that's really what is helping guide all of the panels and the timing and everything like that. So if you have an action scene and, like, let's say there's an action scene in pretty limited dialogue, I would capture any of those little dialogue bits. I might even do a scratch audio for myself, and then start to, with the thumbnails in the within the script. Like I said before, I do like little doodles just to kind of visually give myself an idea. But once you really get into storyboarding, you really want to create kind of a soundscape, and that soundscape is going to help guide all of those actions. So if it's a car chase, you're going to hear the engines roaring, and there's dramatic music in the background, and then there's a crash. And once you build in that audio cue, then you know when the crash is going to happen. And so there's a harmony between drawings and sound. And when you start to bring those together, then you're already seeing your film come to life. And I think that's that important thing that I'm getting towards, is being able to visualize everything before you're actually in production. So if it's an action scene, what I would do personally is go look at reference and look at other fights and things like that to give myself some ideas of how the pacing would go. But everything should be kind of directed towards the soundscape that you can build for yourself. And what I mentioned before, an animatic is essentially just the storyboard panels built into a sequence. So you have 50 drawings for 30 seconds or a minute of action scene. If you don't know, if you don't have any sound cues or anything guiding you there, then you're just gonna have, it's gonna have, be lifeless, because you're just gonna have cuts to panels with no reasoning behind it. So it's really important to draw out those ideas, but also marry that with timing through sound.
And you mentioned you mentioned that you had examples of things that you're working on. Is that something you can show us at all? Was that what you were referring to?
Oh, nothing that I'm actually working on right now. I've got some former examples I could pull up, or even just examples on YouTube for like feature films, and we could speak to that as well and just see the one-to-one comparison of like what does the panel look like and what does the film like final result look like. And you'll see that the storyboard panel and the film are almost identical in the way that they're composed, because for these big productions or even small productions, the director knows the importance of the storyboarding element. So you're really working out what the shot is going to be in that storyboarding sense long before you get to the cinematography part of it. And really the goal once you're on set to film these things is to match the storyboard, because you've already established everything there. There shouldn't be as much guesswork getting into that point in time.
Okay, I mean, if there's something you can share, I think it would be a great thing. I can
Yeah, I was looking at this one before. I'll pull it up real quick. Any questions in the meantime of
well, it was interesting you mentioned documentary, like you're working on documentaries, because I wouldn't have thought that storyboarding would be an important part of documentaries, but I guess it just it's I've also been involved in documentaries, so it's just sort of a eye-opening statement
yeah,
to me.
like for documentaries, I would panel out what the interview setup is going to look like, any type of b-roll that might be influential, just to kind of help pace that out. But significantly the storyboarding comes in if you have any visual elements supporting the documentary. So most of my animation work on documentaries is like, there's been a lot, but cutting to maps or cutting to like statistical details, text on screen. We've also done like caricatures or things of that nature, where we're working on a film about a football team, and we're asking all of the old players, but they want to talk about their life in the 70s and the 60s. So naturally you have to cut away to some different element, and with that element we had a bunch of illustrations, kind of like comic book style, and we had to storyboard all of these panels out to be able to say, okay, we're going to cut away, and we already have the dialogue of the documentary that we shot, and that's going to help pace, when they're talking about these different events that happened to them. Eventually we're going to have it all illustrated and animated, but to just storyboard that out with drawings really gives the the director and anyone else that might be involved, like executive producer, just an idea of what that is going to visually look like, and then also how to bid the project for how much it's going to cost. Because if you just go into it and say, you come to a studio and say, yeah, I need storyboarding for this part, they're going to give you some huge number or just like a ballpark number. But even if on your own end, if you're making a film and you can kind of thumbnail out your ideas and have something to give to these storyboard artists that you might be hiring, would go a long way in deciding like what that bid is going to be, how many panels might it be, and things of that nature.
Okay, and then yeah, someone's also asking whether you could show an example of marrying the sound with the visual in the storyboard.
Yeah, definitely. This was let me do a screen share. Sorry, I'm on my iPad right now. Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen here. This is a good example that I was watching earlier. Pardon the ad real quick. Is it okay that we show a film that's made like this? This is from Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
But I think it's a really great example. I think that's really good. So yeah, storyboard on the top. And you'll see these little notes within the storyboard too that are really important to produce some kind of introduction of things that are used on set.
And you,
What are they? They were once men, great kings of men. And then Sauron the Deceiver gave to them 9 rings of power. Blinded by their greed, they took them without question, one by one, falling into darkness. And now they are slaves to his will. They are the Nazgul, ring wraiths, neither living nor dead.
Okay, so I think that's a really great example. Let me stop sharing here. Did that come through? The sound and everything?
yeah, that was really good. I just couldn't hear you talking during it, but
Oh, no problem.
no, that was fantastic. And I really liked the way they had arrows to show camera movement, and it's fascinating. I mean, like every scene, every cut, every shot was storyboarded for that whole
Yeah,
scene.
so I mean, it to me, if you can't through drawings and the soundscape and everything, if you can't create an emotional element that's connecting with you within that pre-production stage, then it might not work in your actual production. So I think that's where drilling through all of these details and getting your timing and spacing and what am I actually looking at during this part of the script is so important before you get to the actual production stage. Which is why I can watch animatics all day of things like that where they're in that pre-production stage creating storyboards, and it's the storyboards in themselves are visually appealing and beautiful and tell the story in their own way, which I really love.
Yeah, I mean that was it didn't exactly show the marrying of the sound though. I mean, it didn't. I don't think. Are there like sound things that you put on the drawings that?
Yeah, so like in my workflow, I would have the the little scribbles or the thumbnails, and then I would start to build out a soundscape, get any dialogue on there, and then once you start to, you just kind of chipping away. It's like having a big ice block, and you're making a sculpture, and you just start chipping away at little things. So first, you've got your script and your tiny little drawings to give you somewhere to go, and then from there, you just start really taking the scribbles and placing them in time to give you a general sense of where you're going to go with it. And then you start dropping in the little sound cues that start to make sense with the story. So back to the Lord of the Rings part, you've got the screeching of the, I'm not, it's been a while since I've seen the film. I don't know what those are exactly, but the wraiths or the ghost or whatever. And then there's like certain elements of the dialogue, they're stabbing the blankets. All of those are different elements that you can build sound for and to help time out how this film is going to go, or for this like particular scene that you're storyboarding for. And then really by the end of the whole thing, once you paneled out each scene, you really have your whole film done by the end of it. It might take you a year or two to get through that in the pre-production stage for these large films, but at that point, your director, your producers, everyone that needs to have eyes on it to say, this is exactly what we're going for. They can all see it at that stage.
Yeah, and it seems like the shooting of those, the different camera angles, to you already know where you're setting up cameras, where you're doing all this stuff. Based, it's all preset. So, I mean, I know a lot of times wasted on set when we're not using storyboards to, you know, see, is this the right place for this shot? Is this, so, yeah, I mean, would you say that you would do every scene in a storyboard or just key scenes? I mean, I know,
I would, if knowing that the cost benefit is there, and that's just, you can't run away from that. Every time you're doing storyboards, you're saving yourself 50%, 90% on the production cost by not twiddling your thumbs, wondering like, how are we going to visualize this? What's the lighting going to be? And all of these different elements that you work out in pre-production. It seems like something that doesn't get enough attention, which I'm happy to talk about with this whole thing. And the other thing is, not only for film but also commercial work, we do storyboarding. So the last animation studio that I was at, we did a lot of like 3D animated commercials. We did a lot of 2D animated commercial type work. All of that gets storyboarded too. So I think if, as we're trying to find careers in film and where our fit is, if you can be a talented storyboard artist, you are literally, you can be used on any and every type of production out there. Which is, one thing I tell my students, that I teach 2D animation, and I get a lot of students that love to draw, and I say, get really good at storyboarding, because even if you don't find a job in animation, you can find a job doing commercial work, doing anything, because it's so important.
Yeah, it almost seems like there are people in these panels that have been talking about graphic art, graphic novels and things like that. It almost seems like storyboarding has almost its roots or vice versa in, telling a story, just like a graphic novel, it's just pictures and bubbles, talk bubbles.
Mhm.
Seems like, yeah, there's a huge correlation in that. I guess just the depth of the detail is more in the graphic novel.
Right.
But like, so I guess you would also want to be on set because there were changes and, things that happened on the fly where you'd have to reshoot something. You would need to quickly storyboard. So how quickly can things be storyboarded? Like
Yeah.
if you do on the fly.
I've been a huge fan. I've converted a lot of my work to the iPad Pro. So typically on set, every person, it depends on this. When it comes to speed, each person has their own individual speed that they can work at. But as long as, I would highly suggest anyone on set that might be finding themselves in a position where they might be storyboarding or working on the visuals, the iPad is the way to go. It's got such great software and utility for looking at your script, taking notes on your script, to scribble on with your Apple Pencil. Here's the little pencil that I use. It's an Apple Pencil. You can write on the screen, take your notes, also draw, storyboard, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's an ever evolving thing as you're working on the story, because you're so closely tied to the director and the script writer and all of these key components within the pre-production stage, where you're finding out what's our story, how's it visually going to work, and like what are our character arcs, and building all of that together and harmoniously will keep you on track, so that your story and the visuals all working together.
And then Christopher says, forgive the obvious suggestion, but it sounds like the storyboard artist designs and directs the pace. And things.
I think so, yeah. I think that's one of the most important things that I see students discover. I love my intro courses because you see the light bulb turn on. We're like, oh, this is how you pace in time a film at this stage, not on set or like in editing, but really the timing and the pacing should be preset before you're going into these different elements, so that you know when to say cut and you know when the scene should be over. And so you're not just running through dialogue scenes over and over and over, knowing that visually we don't even need this shot anymore because we've already paneled it out and we can just switch over to this medium close-up over here or something like that.
And do you ever have like disagreements with the writer or like that says, no, I wanted it this way and you're taking it this way?
Naturally, I I think this is the one part I'm kind of a softie, but I think naturally this is where I sometimes make a hard line in the sand and say, I've already seen this in my head a million times. I know it's going to work. I've workshopped this your script, and I know that these visuals are impactful. And granted, you want to be receptive and to be collaborative, but also at the same time, as a storyboard artist, it's your job to make sure that as you visualize these elements, that they're all working together and capturing the most important scenes in the best way possible. So I think if you do your due diligence and you work through, you do revisions, I think that's one thing that people don't talk about is just revising is a huge part in this. And your first panel is not going to be your last. And working with the director and the script writer, you should already be on the same page. But if I go away in a corner and I draw these things out and I come back and show them to the people, then I want to stay behind my work, but I also want to be receptive to what they have to say for sure.
And then with you were talking about, you were doing a documentary on sports teams. Like, are there ever like showing live sporting and things that are happening in the game that also need to be storyboarded? Like, are you taking footage from the actual in a documentary? You're not setting up you want to show somebody scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, if we have found footage like that, B-roll that's from long ago or whatever, I'm not usually paneling for that because it's already established. There's no pacing or visuals to establish there because that's already footage that will just be laid in as is. But when it comes to an element that's based on a script that has no visual element, then it's open to be storyboarded.
And then it seems like, like I said, so I've done a few movies without, like, what's a good way to convince productions to use a storyboard artist? Are there places to, do you look for projects that are happening that you don't see storyboard and you're trying to sell yourself as like necessary, or is it, just kind of people come to you when they already know they want a storyboard artist?
Yeah, most of the time people come to me. I think if you're working in a studio environment, it's just a natural phase that every project that we ever touch gets storyboarded. So it's up to the producer within the animation house to budget and to allocate on every project. This is how much storyboarding that we can afford or do. And if you're a freelancer, then hooking up with filmmakers, big and small, and just offering up those services and letting them know and informing them, like, the storyboarding not only does it save you time and money, but you're going to be able to visualize whatever you're doing ahead of time so that if you need to make changes before you get on set, here's the time and energy well spent. So I think networking has been a huge thing for me, going out there and just introducing myself. A lot of people don't think to storyboard, so getting that information out there and letting them know the benefits has been greatly important for me. And I think that's where a lot of my connections have come from, just networking, talking about the skill set, talking about storyboarding, and letting people know about those benefits.
I guess if you wanted to get into the storyboarding, like, how you have to be obviously a talented artist, but like if you're going to storyboard something yourself, or just like, can you just sketch out almost like stick figure, if you're going to try to use somebody who's not super expensive, just like
Yeah, I think I start off with like rudimentary stick figure type drawings, just within that. Like, if I've got my script right here and all my lines, that's kind of what I'm doing off to the side. Just imagining, okay, here's like a tiny square and I know it's going to be a two shot. So I'm just going to draw two little stick figures talking to each other. And then when something happens, I'm going to draw a close up stick figure because they're reacting to something. So starting with that baseline will at least at minimum give you some idea of the shot composition moving forward. Even if that's all you do, when you have your script and you're on set, you can at least say, okay, at this line, we're probably going to cut and go to like this type of shot because we need to get that reaction of this character as opposed to staying on this wide. So that's like a really high level way to do it. But if you look back at the ring drawings, I wouldn't say that's like some ultra talented artist made all of these things. I think it's, if you can draw and look at reference and find some inspiration, as long as you can kind of capture some of those elements, then I think you're doing yourself a huge service. And not all storyboards have to be drawn. If you're doing commercial work, there's potential you can just go into Photoshop, and like one of our clients was Otterbox that we all often worked with. And so we would just find images of an iPhone from different angles and use those elements to storyboard. And nothing was hand drawn. It was just, here's the iPhone coming into the frame, and then it's going to click into a case. So then we took a screenshot, or, you know, from there, they would give us like promotional materials. We would take the iPhone within the OtterBox case and then put that there so that we know, okay, the phone flew in, it's in the case, and then now text is going to come up, and we just type in text. You can do this in Google Slides. This is basically how we did some of this stuff, is just showing the imagery, and then you can walk your client through the script and the visual. So if you have a client like Otterbox, like we had, we could say, okay, here's the script, and we have Google Slides, and we're just gonna go to the next slide every time we have a visual change. And so even if you don't take it through the cinematic phase where you have it timed out with audio, you at least have images in sequence to say, here's the script, and here are the stages of which things are going to happen, and here's an idea of what it might look like.
Okay, I think someone's asking, are there programs you can use to upload your drawings into? Is that?
Yeah, so the most widely used software that storyboard artists would use is Storyboard Pro. That's from a company called Toon Boom. That's if that's your bread and butter. That's every day you're working storyboarding, I would say, okay, use that software. Photoshop is a close second that a lot of people use, and that's more tied to the Adobe suite. So if you're editing and doing stuff in After Effects, you probably have Photoshop. Photoshop's got a timeline now, so you can actually do all of your storyboarding and bring in your sound and do all of the timing within Photoshop, which is great. Me personally, though, I like to just do the panels and then export them into Premiere and start to build out my soundscape and stuff like that. But on the iPad now, I've completely switched everything to the iPad. And most recently, I'm using a software called Procreate Dreams, which essentially you can draw on a surface area, and then every time you're making that drawing, there's a timeline, and you can just choose how long each scene's going to last. And you can be real scribbly at first on a layer for like the first pass of drawing, and then you can keep driving into those details as much as you want. If you want to take an extra pass at lighting, or an extra pass at like what kind of camera move will I have for this certain scene, you can kind of like scale in and zoom elements, just so you can really take it as far as you want. You can build the film completely animated if you want within the software, if you so choose to take it that far. Things have come a long way, and it's pretty powerful.
I was going to ask if you had used 3D animation at all in some of the storyboarding.
Yeah, actually, so I'm not a 3D artist by trade, but I know that there's a huge shift of storyboard artists using Blender, which is a 3D program. So for something like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, where you've got scenes where people are flying off buildings and doing all of this crazy stuff, essentially the storyboard artists on these films would build out a cityscape, and within Blender, the software, and it's free, by the way, there's something called Grease Pencil, and you can storyboard in 3D so that as your camera is shifting and going around these cityscapes, your drawings that you place are actually something within 3D that you can move so that as Spidey's swinging from left to right, it's actually tracking within the 3D environment. So that's something that's relatively new, and I think it's something that's very leveraged by artists that are working in 3D films.
And that site was called Blender, did you say?
It's a software, yeah.
Software, I mean, software.
Yeah, it's a free 3D software, and actually there's a huge shift in the industry going towards that.
Is that something you're concerned about, putting into your
Not necessarily, just because I don't really work a lot in like 3D animated feature films. I think if that was my bread and butter, I would wholeheartedly accept that. Most of my stuff has been either commercial, documentary filmmaking, or 2D animation. So like I'm in my comfort zone where I can just panel on a flat page without needing to really consider too many 3D environments and 3D camera moves.
And then, like, as an example, what's like the longest scene you've ever had to storyboard? Because has there been like an epic?
Just really like I wouldn't say there's like one scene that comes to mind, but the cool thing to me is when you storyboard out an entire film, and before it's even shot, sometimes before an actor is even selected, you have the film basically visualized before you're getting into production. And to like, to me, getting into character, I'm not like a crazy person outside of drawing and like working within storyboarding, but like once you get these characters and you have the script, you have to put yourself in their shoes. And so I think getting through big scenes and having to realize, working with the director, what is this character going to act like? What's their body posture? How do they speak? What's their pacing of tone? And all of these things. To me, that's the most exciting part, is you're breathing life into the words that are just a script at this moment. And the second you start putting that pencil down, you're really bringing into life what these characters might look like, how they might feel, what the environment looks like. Because not only are you drawing the characters, but you're drawing the backgrounds, you're considering the lighting, all of these types of things. So back to your original question of like a certain scene, I think that more than anything is certain characters that are really fun to bring to life, more than anything.
So it sounds like that you need, so like I'm a screenwriter first, so like it sounds like you do go through the same process of like, getting the emotional feeling of every character in that scene. You probably need to even do it more because you have to add the element of the background, the environment. Whereas a writer, well, when I write, I become every character. Like it sounds like you go through the same thing, which sounds like, you totally understand where the scene's going because you understand what the character's motivations are and things like that. I don't know if there's a question in there, but that sounds like
Yeah, no, I think it is like whenever I go to write a scene, I'm not a very good writer. I think we would be a good pair because like to me, drawing is writing for me. Being able to dump some temporary text in for me, but then also visually play out the scenes and to use that as my tool for writing is like, I think they go hand in hand. Writing, you're using words to convey an image, whereas drawing, you're using pictures to convey text. So I think one can't live without the other in that process.
okay. And then I was going to ask this question, but I'm going to let Christopher. He said, "How can an independent filmmaker budget for storyboarding a feature? What sort of range do artists bid?"
I would say that a flat rate is probably your safest bet. Try and lock someone in for the entire project so that you're not nickel and diming per scenes. And based on what I'm a college professor and I have students dying for experience and they're also talented. So I honestly think there's some way to network with colleges if you're an independent filmmaker and you just like need someone to help you out. go to your local art college wherever you live and try and find budding 2D animators or storyboard artists and use them, because they're trying to establish themselves as storyboard artists, and they've already taken a lot of courses and they're ready. So it's this perfect timing to help someone out, and let them help you out by keeping those costs, to something more entry level. But the range from someone coming out of college might charge 20-25 bucks an hour, give or take, depending on where you live. But professionally, you're looking more towards like 500 to 800 a day for a seasoned veteran that can knock out a bunch of panels and really help you out.
And then do you look at scripts first before you bid, or is it something that are there scripts that you wouldn't do because it just doesn't seem like the right fit?
Yeah, I rarely find myself turning down work, but I would say, but I always want to be attached to the story. And for me, if the story doesn't feel meaningful, then my characters aren't going to be meaningful. Like if I don't have that immediate connection, usually there's a spark or something that makes me feel emotional. And I think if I can find that, then I have something to hold on to. But if I'm reading a script and it is falling flat for me, and I feel like it's not in a place where it's like connecting the dots, then I mean you can still find yourself useful, because with storyboarding you might identify how to improve some of these scenes or to change up dialogue or whatever. But I definitely, if I'm getting a script or a project, I want the characters to be meaningful. I want the story to be meaningful. Or if it's a commercial, then I'm open, because commercials are one and done. They're usually 30 seconds or a minute. You're not invested for 6 months. You might be done with it in a week or two. So those types of projects help keep the lights on, but aren't necessarily like the most satisfying. And you're not diving into characters and like full-fledged scenes and stuff like that.
Do you have any more examples of your work, that you can share, that you're comfortable sharing, something that you've done before? Or...
Let me, yeah, just give me 1 second to pull up. I think I have some examples of what the panels look like for the documentary film that I was talking about, and then I can show you a little bit of the animation as well. Stand by. Okay, so let's see here. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll show you some examples that I have uploaded. A lot of the stuff ends up being kind of NDA'd to death, but these I can show. Okay, so here's like an example of how we might storyboard. This was a commercial for Meta. Essentially, people were uploading offensive content, I'll say, like whether it's gruesome or something like that. The example they gave us was there's like a dead body on the ground, there's police, and people were recording these things and uploading them to Facebook. So they came to us and said, we need to visualize this somehow so that we can tell our users, you can't go and upload all of this offensive content. So they gave us a script, and it's this combination between paneling your storyboards of what these situations look like, where these individuals are filming content that shouldn't be on social media, but then also flipping to like graphical images like this, where we're within the animation. Once it gets to the animation part, we're going to say here's like a good example and a bad example, and then we cut again to animated content. And so here we've kind of superimposed some of the logo, or not logos, but icons and text that are going to come up in the animation. And then we have and then we talk about how Facebook has to review all of these details. So then we'll make, like a million posts. And so it's not always storyboarding for film where you're trying to figure out camera angles, but sometimes it's just like, what is this 2D animated content going to look like? Here, this is for the sports show that I was talking about. So there were we had the script, and often with the script you have kind of like visual cues or ideas of what that might be. These are usually director notes where you have, especially in a documentary, you've already captured their backstory, where someone's saying, yeah, back in 1970 we were doing such and such, and then this happened. So you've got some visual cues already, and you work with the director to say, okay, here's where we want to cut and show these different scenes, where they're talking about a stadium, and then they're back in the parking lot. And in this particular film, it's called Black and White. It was it's actually like a 3-part miniseries, and it's not distributed yet, but basically it was about how, I think it was USC was one of the first integrated black and white football teams. And so they wanted to go back and show some of the struggles and triumphs that these players went through. And so we would go and panel these things. Here they're being yelled at by a crowd of people for being an integrated black and white team. And then, so you would panel those out, and then you would create a part of the film, which I think I have an example here. Let me just.
And when we came
So
out of
then
the
you
locker room,
you
there were
illustrate all
thousands
these
of them
different
waiting
details.
for us, holding candles, singing
And
hymns,
through storyboarding, we've
reading
already
Bibles on the bus.
established what they're all going to
My
look
dad
like.
talked about it all the time. Later in life,
So
it was
when
very
you're
apparent
identifying where
how
to cut,
important it was
you
to people.
storyboard those parts
He
out,
never would have thought
illustrate
about
them once
it being
the
important
timing
to
and the
him.
pacing feels
There were other
good.
reasons it was important to bear.
And then
and
that's
to
when you
program
know
it,
when to
but
engage
I heard him
the
say,
artist
I
that's
just
going to draw the
never
characters,
thought
and the
that
artist
would
that's
be a
going to draw
reaction.
the animation, and all of these
The
different
USC
things. So,
team demonstrated that
that
blacks,
being able to storyboard
when
that out gives you a really
given
great
the
idea
opportunity,
of
can
how's it going to look, but
perform
also
at least as
who's going to
well
be
and
involved,
sometimes
what do we
better
need
than
to do to
white
get this
players.
production done.
And so that's a message that is not
Let me see if
lost
you
on
can see that a
us.
little bit better. I can't full
So there
screen
was a
it
lot of
for
rejoicing.
some reason.
And it's a little hard to hear you while the thing's talking,
Oh, sorry.
but it was, but I got kind of a,
Yeah, and then here over here, this is kind of the what the Facebook video kind of looks like.
Facebook authorized sales partners are vetted local
So these
experts
even
located
these are
around the
3D
globe
animated,
who can help you grow your business using Facebook marketing tools, from diagnosing business needs to providing strategic direction.
all of these, anything that we've worked on, like this little Facebook commercial, everything gets storyboarded. Even just to like, where's the mouse going to go? What's the character doing? All of these different things are so important that you don't want to leave the artist guessing once it gets to the animator's hands, or whatever that might be. And then on the left here, this is just an example of like storyboarding for an explainer video, where this company had an event and they wanted to show, it was like post-COVID, and they wanted to illustrate spheres and circles coming together and kind of that feeling of being together again. So we had the script and we created all of these different emotional elements, and then we played them out in animatics so that you have the voiceover, you've got the music, and you're going to see the images, and all together you can say yay or nay, this is working, this isn't, long before you're actually getting into illustrating or animating any final shots. So that it seems like a benefit across the board for any type of production that you might be doing.
yeah, so what type of script do they come with? Like, do these commercials come with to you? Like, is it in depth what they want, or is it almost like they have a general idea of what they want to convey and you almost create the story? Or is
It's
it
typically it's like a 2-column. You can kind of see it a little bit here where it says visuals and storyboards.
okay, so they'll come to you with that.
To the left of visuals, you would have script, and then you'd have visual, where the director is giving you some idea of what that might be.
Uh-huh.
And you know it because in this instance, it was a documentary film, so we had already filmed all of the players talking about their past experiences.
Mhm.
And so you'd identify this particular scene. Stanford fans are shaking their fists and shouting. The USC team walks to the stadium. So that was a moment where the director identified, okay, this is something I want to visually show. Instead of just staying tight on the person talking about it, I want to cut and show these players getting yelled at as they're entering a stadium. So you would have that script on the left, visual column in the middle, and then once the storyboard panels are getting worked on, you can see here, this is kind of what the panel looks like. And on the top, you can see the organization. You've got black and white is the story that we're working on. 103 is season 1, episode 3, or something like that. And then you've got shot 40, scene, and then 010 is kind of like the which panel is going in for this shot.
And then, so was this scene actually staged, or was there already footage of that scene?
No, this wasn't staged at all. It's up to the storyboard artist to go onto YouTube, or not YouTube, but I mean scour the internet for examples.
Yeah.
And so whenever I'm going into my process like this, and I know that, okay, I need football players walking to a stadium, what I'll do is first just Google that, football players walking to a stadium, try and find an image that speaks to me. If it doesn't, then what I'll do is kind of composite within Photoshop. I'll start taking elements. So if I find like a good stadium and a good setup, I'll take that, and then I'll find crowd yelling and get these people on the left and right. Maybe it's from something else, a protest, and I'll clip those people out and put those in, and then I'll find football players walking from behind and place those in. And then once I have that composite, then I have the reference image that I'm looking for to help me kind of draw out what the scene might look like. Rarely do I find myself just drawing and trying to visualize it without any type of reference to kind of base me in reality of what these elements look like.
And do you need to get the rights to those type of shots that you're talking about, or is that something that's public domain? You're taking them from?
It's from from my understanding, I don't think there are any rights that need to be had, because you're just, it's like you're going out in the world and you're just, imagine you're walking up to a stadium and you're just drawing what you see. So I'm not necessarily taking any element, I'm just using that as inspiration, and never does whatever reference footage of this stadium, whatever like image I was using to draw from, it's not actually going to end up looking like that in any measurable way. So I think you're in the clear if you work that way.
Okay, and then there's just one last question before we wrap up. Someone wants to know, are there students that actually get training in storyboarding at film schools?
Absolutely. That's one of the big key things that we do. We have, so at a school like ours, Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, let me stop sharing my screen here. So our students come in and they take a fundamentals course of animation. And within that fundamentals course, they learn the storyboarding process. They learn animation. It's basically like an intro to animated filmmaking. So you get a taste of it there. But then we have 3 subsequent courses that all focus just on storyboarding, from like beginner, medium, and advanced. So by the time students are ready to graduate, they know how to draw from any angle. They know the significance of different camera angles. They know how to time and pace and to bring characters to life through acting. We have a course called Drawing for Acting. I think that's one of the most advanced level storyboarding classes that we offer. And it's just about performative drawings within storyboarding panels to really get a point. If I have a dialogue scene and the characters are yelling at each other, how do I visualize that and draw that out? Or if it's an action scene, how do I visualize and draw that out? So we put a lot of time and effort into it, and probably could use even more, just because of how closely tied storyboarding is to every level of production.
And so looking for a freelance storyboard artist, where should I go? He's in New York. I mean, do you have information that you can give out to contact you or,
Yeah, sure. I'd say I don't know if they have access to my email or any information like that, but
if you want to put it in the chat box, that would be,
yeah, absolutely. Let me find the chat real quick. Sorry, 1 second.
and your company is, what's the name of your company or your college that you,
Yeah, the college that I teach at is Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. And the little production studio that I have is milehighanimatio.com. And it's kind of a combo. I teach kids 9 to 17 through that. We do summer camps. And when I'm not busy with that, I'm freelancing. But I think network, find someone that resonates with you. Because I think once you have a storyboard artist that you know how to draw and can bring your stories to life, then don't let that person go because of how important that element is to the entire production. So if you find a storyboard artist that kind of can meet your vision and help you see things that you can't, don't let that person go.
no. All right, well, thank you so much. It's been really informative. I'll definitely use Storyboarder on my new project. So
Yeah, even just to practice on your own before you get into the production, just sketch out some of the shots or look up, some visuals that might help influence what your scene might look like. And I think you'll find that there's a use case for it in every stage of the production, minus post.
Okay, well, my renditions wouldn't be, even my stick figures are bad, so I'm a terrible artist, so.
Sure. Hey, well then there's work to do and improve on.
All right, well, thanks a lot, and thanks everyone.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
So long.